Awesome. Awesome. All right. Guys ready to get started? All right. So my name is Branyon. I own Home Team Inspection Service. Just a little bit about me. I've been in business for 11 years. We've done just around 12,000 home inspections since I've owned the company. So I have seen anything and everything that you guys can imagine when it comes to a real estate transaction. I can get into stories all day long if you guys wanted to. So tell me, since we have a pretty small crowd, tell me a little bit about you guys so I can kind of gauge experience and what you guys are looking for. Sorry, someone else has to go. She's eating chili. Yeah.
So I joined the firm end of April.
Okay.
And I have friends that maybe some interest in repair negotiations.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I've been an agent for almost 6 years, but still, it's sometimes hard to talk to people about the repairs and make them, well, they want you to tell them what to do.
Yeah.
And I can't do that, but I mean.
Because you don't feel like you have the knowledge, or?
No, it's just, I don't want them to do something or not do something because I said so.
Gotcha.
So, I sometimes will make a recommendation if it's a bunch of little things. No, let's just let that go. Let's focus on the big things. But sometimes making them understand even more.
Sure. So we'll talk about getting more information around it, so that way, because I think information is key, right? Just bring information to the table, present it to your clients. You can certainly make a recommendation, but if they're struggling to make a decision, they need probably more information to try to get there, right?
A big thing is crawl spaces that you can see into.
Yep.
You know something's wrong. Like I did a showing yesterday and there was a spongy floor. I know something's wrong.
Yep.
But how to kind of approach that, and it's tricky.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Anybody else? Hillary, I know your experience, but is there anything you're wanting specific?
Yeah, I guess just hearing your perspective on how to best prioritize things that are really important, and how to kind of phrase things in a way that I've said, well, I'll segue a little bit. A couple times when I've used different inspectors, when they're doing the debriefing, they talk too much, and they're giving the homeowner, the prospective homeowner, so much information that they're really starting to freak out a little bit, and it helps them to be able to, kind of back up a little bit once they're gone. Be like, hey, now let's just kind of, put this in perspective. In the grand scheme of things, this is relatively cheap.
Yep.
This is actually not a big deal. This is.
Yep. Yeah.
And help them prioritize.
I think
so they're not all over the place.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we'll cover a lot about expectations and conversations, because we don't kill deals, but you also can't rely on somebody 100%, right? So your buyer is going to bring somebody in that is going to torch a deal. You have to know how to handle that ahead of time, right? So anybody else? Just zip it and move on. That's fine too. Because this is a small group, by the way, don't make this formal, interrupt me, ask questions. I'm here to help make sure you guys are in a better position when you leave so that you're able to negotiate repairs better. Because if I'm being completely honest, this is where you guys earn your commission. it's not showing the homes. Lead generation is hard, but getting through this experience with your clients still liking to talk to you at the end of it can be challenging sometimes. And oftentimes that's when we hear complaints about realtors is after the transaction is done of, Sally didn't navigate this well. And there's a whole bunch of things that now that I'm living in the house that I wish we had gotten done that we didn't get done because she told me it wasn't a big deal. And, we're kind of moving on. Right. So, we are what you'll get today. So we're going to talk about how to tell the difference between large and small issues, pre-inspection conversations to have with your buyer. We're going to be very intentional on the buy side, but certainly you can take a lot of this and apply it to the listing side because the conversations aren't a whole lot different. How to screen and work with the right contractors, which is also going to help avoid killing deals. And then how to leave yourself room in negotiations. I think where, we hear all the time, like home inspectors can't be deal killers. And what I think that means is we put you guys in a position that you can't negotiate your way out of, right? So that's, you have to be able to prep ahead of time and know how to navigate that to leave yourself some room. And ultimately that's where I think inspectors are going to be the best. And then again, managing the process to get your clients to close it. So again, just a little bit more information about me. Just for at least semi-credibility there. So the buyer conversation that most agents don't have, and I touched on this a little bit in the team meeting, is you're not having a formal conversation with your buyer before even showing homes. Right? You may have the conversation about how many bedrooms do you want? How many bathrooms do you want? What's the price point? What's the style? What's the neighborhood? There are so many people that have past trauma from homes that needs to come out before you guys ever show a house, right? Some people are just gonna be like, no, I'm good to go. They're easy to work with and you just keep moving. But having the question of, is there anything that you've dealt with in the past that you completely do not want to deal with again? Well, I had a flooded basement. Okay, take me a little bit deeper. Let me understand what that is. Well, our sewer line backed up and we had this whole big giant issue. Okay, so now I know that when I order an inspection, I'm going to get a sewer scope, right? So that you know that ahead of time, you're prepared for it and you can deal with it. It may also mean that you avoid neighborhoods that have cast iron so that you don't have old sewer lines, right? I use the example this morning of, a home that the buyer had already backed out of contract twice because of termite issues and said, I do not want termites in my house. So the agent put them under contract in the 1900s farmhouse that had termites so bad that the tubes were going into the attic, right? So termites work their way from the ground up. If they get to the attic, they have eaten the house. That was also one of the fun stories where the listing agent called me and she's like, what do I do about this? And it's like, call the fire department and just have them torch and start from scratch, sell the land. Like, I don't know what to tell you. Cause you're not going to rebuild that completely. But the point of it is she backed out of that house again for a third time because the agent was just trying to push something through as opposed to listening and understanding what their client wants, right? Again, what experiences do you not want to repeat from the past? Understanding what their budget is for repairs once they move through this process. If they're like, hey, I am putting every single dollar I have into this, you guys will know as you show homes what is deferred maintenance and what is going to take some elbow grease to get the right way, right? We deal with clients a lot of times that are moving in with no flexible cash. Right. So if it's the right house and it needs a lot of work, maybe you get some protection with a home warranty as part of that contract. Right. So there's a lot of different ways to look at it. But if they don't have a budget, you need to know that. If they do have a budget, you need to know that. If that budget is $15,000 and you're like, cool, we can really work with this for the right house, that's great. Not saying that people should spend $15,000 when they move in. And then, is there anyone that you want to lean on for advice during inspections? Buyer's dad, Anybody?
Yeah.
Right? Stepdad, husbands, wives, moms, like whoever that is, like whoever they lean on for advice, know who that person is so that you can also help set expectations with them ahead of time as well. Right? Like I'm really good at dealing with the buyer's dad because I hand him a notepad with a pen and just say like, hey, you go find everything so that we make sure we don't miss anything while we're here. Right? Like there's ways to deal with them, but you have to know who's going to have that influence so that you can help manage that influence before you get there. And again, this all should happen before you ever show a home.
You may have already said, but will the slides be available so I don't miss?
Yeah, so the recording is going to be available.
That's what you said, you
Yeah.
The slides to the owners and that stuff.
Perfect. Yep. So we'll do that. Yes. All right. So pre-inspection conversation. So now that you've had that with the buyer ahead of time before you started showing homes, now we're going to talk about what to do when you're under contract. If you guys are not scripting something or at least bullet pointing something to go through with your buyers every single time they're under contract, take the information you learned today and start doing it. So what a home inspection is, they need to be prepared because they've likely either never had a home inspection or it's been 7 to 10 years since they have had one and things change over time. What is a home inspection? It's a visual snapshot in time. You guys understand what a home inspection is, your clients don't, right? Have that script also cover what are the emotional things that they're going to be dealing with. Part of what our team does every single time we go through our debrief or walkthrough or whatever you want to call it is, especially if they're a first-time home buyer, where we pause and say, you are going to feel overwhelmed. You're going to feel like your house is falling down and you're going to feel like you should not buy this house. Those feelings are normal and they're not that, right? Like we've done 12,000. There's maybe 3 that I'm actually legitimately worried about something falling down. It doesn't happen that often. And I've seen crazy things be negotiated in any process, right? But address those feelings ahead of time, because when you're standing there and you see your client have that deer in a headlight look, you'd be like, remember we talked about this? This exact moment is what we were talking about. Let's take a deep breath. Let's move on. We've got you, right? Not that anybody has emotions in this process though, right? Talk through what your role is during this process. You'd be amazed at how many people how many clients are asking us for what the next steps are, when in reality, that's what a realtor is for, right? We can help, we can kind of set some expectations, but ultimately, like, your client should know what your role is, how to handle it, that, hey, I might make some suggestions, but this is really going to be something that you guys need to come to me with the information you want, and I'll try to work my best for you. Verify any requirements that the lender has. Lenders lie. They will tell you anything to also get under contract because they don't want to check with the underwriters. Get that done ahead of time so that everything is done during the inspection. Time kills deals. You guys know that's like a very common sales thing. And then go through the plan once they receive the report. So you guys probably have a process. Hey, we're going to get the inspection report. We're going to get everything. I want you guys to review it yourselves. So I want you said you're going to lean on your dad. I want you to talk with your dad. And then I want to get you guys on a Zoom or meet in a coffee shop or whatever. And we're going to go through line by line, whatever that is, whatever your process is, make sure they understand. So that way they're not guessing at next steps. Remember, you're the guide and the coach. Lead them through the process. You're the expert. You're not a bounce back for your client. There are times for sure that your client's going to be like, you work for me and you need to do this. Okay. But you can also understand how to navigate that, right? And try to figure out what makes them feel so strongly. Any questions so far about buyers and all that? How many of you guys have conversations once you get under contract with the listing agent about the inspection process? You do? Sometimes? You do, Hillary? Sometimes, yep. This is something that is coming up more and more recently with the way that the market has shifted toward people are actually negotiating repairs again. Back in 2022, they weren't. buyers have the expectation now of they're making a big jump to get into the market, as you guys know. They're expecting the seller to do more and more, right? Talk to the listing agent ahead of time and let them know. I think we've got bullet points coming up. Make sure they know the timeline on inspections. We've had a lot of times where people will call us on a Friday, they'll book it for a Monday, and then Sunday afternoon, we get showing time declined because the seller's not available, they have something going on. And it's like, why wasn't this conversation had ahead of time before you start, changing other people's times, right? Let them know who's going to be in the house, what you're testing for. So if you know that you're going to get a septic inspection, make sure they understand, make sure the listing agent understands, hey, we're getting a septic inspection, your seller's going to have the yard dug up, right? Hey, we're going to have a radon test. There's going to be a blinky box sitting in a living room that your seller is not going to know about. They don't read the information that we leave, even though it says radon test, do not touch. We still get calls that are like, what is this box? Try to get out in front of that ahead of time, and then get any documentation you can on repairs, maintenance, additions, permits, whatever they have on the house, have them leave it out on the kitchen table. Because, well, one, you guys need to have that documentation to help, but inspectors are also really nosy. So if you put, if they know that they've had structural work done and they have the warranty and they have the information sitting out, that we know how to talk through it and we can see what work's being done, and it changes the way we do the inspection, right? We did a house a couple months ago that had eaves siding. You guys all know what eaves is? So artificial stucco that traps water and can rot the side of your house, right? So this was, go away, James. This is like one of the things that changed that is that usually ends up being a really scary conversation. The buyer didn't understand what it was, but they had gotten moisture tests. They had gotten everything done ahead of time and had put it in a binder that we could look through. And then we could educate the buyer on like, hey, these are the common issues that you see with these. This is what it is. This is why it's going to read scary in our report. Based on all this information, like, you're good. And I would call this company to make sure they're continuing to maintain the house as you guys move in, right? So when you talk about, doing that for the listing side, prepping your sellers to make sure, hey, let's leave, even if it's just a simple HVAC maintenance or a pest control statement or something like that, just leave it out so people can see. And then make sure utilities are on. This is something we run into 25-30% of the time, especially on a vacant home. People turn utilities off all the time. Make sure they are turned on, and make sure that it is turned on in the house as well as by the utility company. So if you turn water on, the utility company is going to come switch it on the street. They're not going to go into the crawl space and turn the main water shutoff valve. Inspectors will not operate that main water shutoff valve. Make sure that everything is on there. These are all things, by the way, that help delays, which will help you better navigate the deal, right? Because this also is when things start becoming contentious. When you're having to reschedule 5 different times and get stuff in, like, it's already off on the bad foot, right? And you've been in for six years, like, you've probably seen several of those, right? And then just kind of remember as you go through, it's your job to work with the listing agent or with the buyer's agent to get to the end goal, which is to get the house sold, right? You want to do what's best for your client, but ultimately the seller wants to sell, the buyer wants to buy, and it's y'all's job to navigate to the finish line together. Seen a lot of bullies in this business that make it contentious, thinking that's what's best for their client, and that's usually not. All right, so once you get to the inspection, be there or have somebody there with your buyer. So if your buyer is going to be there and you can't be there, I just talked to Crystal Williams and said there's a ton of showing agents here. So get with somebody that can come be at the inspection, because you're going to need some help managing expectations, right? Your buyer starts freaking out and you talk to that showing agent, say, hey, look, they might freak out a little bit. Here's my process. Tell them what's coming next. Calm them down. Call me right after, right? Because you can't be everywhere at once, but you want to try to be ahead. Don't be scared to ask dumb questions. It's really, really important because a lot of people are. They don't want to look dumb in front of their client. If you are scared of looking dumb in front of your client, pull your inspector aside, make sure they can answer the question for you. Have a good understanding after that review of what's big, small, and may need some reviews. Inspectors are going to try to do some CYA, a whole bunch. So keep pressing it. I will tell you that we will have conversations with agents directly that we will not have in front of the client. So it may be that you say, hey, once the client's gone, I want to talk to you, or I'm going to give you a call when I get in the car, just kind of look through like, hey, I don't want to look like an idiot, and I know you won't say stuff in front of my client. So you tell me what's going on and how I need to start prepping, right? Watch your client's reaction. We talked about that, and then go through next steps again with your client. All right, so this is what you're really here for is now that you have the report, we talk about like, you can't make the determination on what's important to your buyer, right? You understand homes, you understand the process, but you can't necessarily make that decision for them. So you come up with action items as you see necessary, and we'll get into what some of those action items are, but like, what are the big items that we know we need to negotiate? So these are going to be leaks, standing water, sewer backups, roofing issues, HVAC issues. Like, there's the obvious big things, right? Like, I think everybody can sit there and go, yeah, the HVAC's not working. That's a big issue we need to get resolved, right? Those are the easy ones. What needs further evaluation? What can be wrapped into a handyman? And then listen to your client and help guide them to that solution. So what needs further evaluation, we'll get into in a little bit as well, because I think a lot of people won't take that next step to dive a little bit deeper into what the problems are, which, you're trying to balance two things during the transaction, right? You're trying to get to the closing table quickly without delay, but you're also trying to prevent that client from calling you in 3 months with a complaint about the house that you sold them, and how dare you sell that to me? And if I had known this, then I never would have closed on the house. Somebody ever got the call? Is that just me? we get that. If I had known this, we never would have bought this house. I'm like, I doubt that. But that is the call we get. That's the emotion. So listen to your client. They will tell you what's important. They will tell you what makes them anxious. They'll tell you what they're willing to live with. And then it's your job to digest that information and process it in a proper way back to the other side, right? So, because again, they're emotional and they're going to have emotions that come through this. All right, so how many people communicate with the listing agent once they get the report? Everybody? I'm going to preface this with, I'm not a real estate agent, so I'm just going to put my realtor shoes on and act like I am for a second. I have seen so many sellers and listing agents jump on big problems before you ever get to the DDR just by letting them know, right? That can be really, because they want to keep the ball rolling too. So a quick call to say, hey, look, we just had the inspection. Everything seemed to go well. You don't have to tell them everything. Just, hey, there's a couple things maybe popping up. I don't think it's going to be a big thing. Or, hey, there are a couple things that we want to evaluate a little bit further that might be big things. You might want to start prepping yourself, right? Let them know any follow-up testing you want to do. So this would be like, hey, we found out we need to bring an HVAC guy back out. We need to bring a structural engineer in. I've gone ahead and done that. Here's what the time frame is. Because again, if you're communicating through that, don't do what I've seen agents do of leave 2 weeks of due diligence and then on the last day you just dump and run, right? That's not going to get you anywhere. It's going to end up with a bad deal for your buyer or your seller. All right, so how to read the inspection report. So how do you tell what the deal breakers are? Deal breakers are subjective, right? There is not an objective deal breaker because things can be negotiated, everything can be fixed. And if you have the money and it can be solved with money, you don't really have a problem, right? It's oversimplifying it a little bit. But if you're looking at like, hey, what are the big issues on the report? versus the small issues. And this is standard across the board for pretty much every single home inspector, is pay attention to who the recommendation goes to. So in North Carolina, we have to write statements in a certain order. We have to describe the issue, determine what it is. We have to give you the implication. What's the course of action if something bad, if you don't fix this kind of thing, and then a direction on who should be fixing it. So I can only speak on ours, but when you start seeing general contractors, licensed contractors, licensed electricians, again, there's gonna be people that CYA this, right? And we'll tell you for a loose outlet that you need a licensed electrician. I'm here to tell you that you don't. You just need a handyman. So they can pigeonhole you a little bit into that. But if you start seeing structural engineer, you know that you're gonna need to get that evaluated. Doesn't mean that it's always gonna be a big fix, but it's an extra step in the process. You gotta pay attention, right? If it's a general contractor, you're like, all right, this is gonna need a little bit more expertise, maybe a little bit deeper of an issue than I thought. When you start seeing review and repair of an entire system, we call this FUBAR comments. Everybody know what that means? Yeah, all right. So I'm not gonna swear. I'm gonna try not to swear in here, but fudged up beyond all recognition is what that stands for. And so when you see, like, we have comments like that where it's like, there's 12 issues on this deck, like, you just need to get the whole system looked at. And what we're really saying is get it redone. But when you see stuff like that, those are gonna be big things. Example of an engineer not being a big fix that can be scary is stuff like cracked trusses, broken trusses in an attic. It's an engineered system. It needs an engineer to look at it. The repair to that is super, super simple, but I've seen contractors mess it up time and time again. So you need the engineer because it all operates together as one unit. And if the contractor doesn't do it the right way, that truss is not going to move the way that it was designed to move with the rest of the house. Water issues are going to be your biggest enemy. That's where I would automatically start. So if you're reading the report and you see standing water, drainage issues, high moisture, condensation, fungal growth, or mold, whatever people call it, ventilation issues, anything like that, like those are the ones that I would start highlighting, right? Lack of vapor barrier in a crawl space. Efflorescence, by the way, it would be one that you might flag. Not that big of a deal as long as there's not standing water there, as long as there's not cracking, it's just staining on a wall. Just says that moisture has gone through at some point. Concrete blocks that we use here are porous, so every house is going to have it. And then systems issues and replacement would be number 2 for me. So if you have major roof issues and you're talking about like what constitutes a major roof issue, older that has leaks present, right? So if you have leaking coming in from the sides, if you have a lot of missing shingles, if you have a lot of damaged shingles, you guys can you can look at a roof and go, yeah, that's old, right? Anybody can make that determination. Old doesn't mean it's not going to function, right? Which I think is important as you get into negotiations, and it's important as you talk to your buyer, right? Hey, this is old. It looks like they've priced this accordingly. We're not going to get a new roof unless something's wrong, right? Having that prepped ahead of time, but that does mean you might need to have that budget to go in, right? It may mean that you get a little extra in closing costs to help them free up some more cash because they know it's going to be replaced within a year or two, right? HVAC issues, kind of the same thing. These, by the way, when it comes to roofing and HVAC, are the 2 most common complaints that we get as an inspection company on things that are missed. Which more tells me on one, like inspectors can't do much with HVAC. So there's that, but it also tells me that those are 2 of the most important things that people deal with, right? Leaking coming through their house and comfort of people inside the home. And then the next step, I would go to safety concerns. This would be excessive mold, big electrical issues, things along those lines that would kind of be tertiary in my book. And Yeah, go ahead.
So if you, say you, hang on a second.
You're good.
That's very on my brain. Okay, so.
The chili's got you.
Fungal growth.
Mhm.
You see a lot,
Every house.
and most time, no high moisture readings or whatever.
Yep.
So you're pretty much gonna see that all the time.
Yep.
So it's really, unless there's standing water, if it's been raining, you, to me, if it's been raining, there's a better chance of standing water or whatever, if it's been dry, who knows, But fungal growth, should that be, if there's no moisture issues, is that a huge problem? I mean.
Depends on your buyer, right? So what I would tell you is that fungus needs moisture to grow and be active, right? When it doesn't have water to intake, it goes dormant. So that line, by the way, is 20%, which is the question you guys need to be asking your inspector is, hey, there's fungal growth here. Cool. What was the moisture?
Right.
If they say we don't carry a moisture meter, you need to find a new inspector.
Right.
We've had that happen more times than I'm shocked that that's like the number one thing after a flashlight that I would carry as a moisture meter, right? There are a lot of inspectors out here that will not carry moisture meters and will not put moisture on stuff, right? Like, boggles my mind, but it happens. You have to be asking the question. When they say, hey, you have some fungal growth in the crawl space, awesome. What was the moisture percentage? And if they say, 19%, 20%, you know that there may be a little extra work to be done to try to keep that humidity down. That changes over time. So like, if you're knocking up against 20% in the winter, you know it's going to be really bad in the summer. Right now, you should be sitting somewhere between like 8 and 12%. And then in the summer, if you're sitting at 18% and there's some stuff there, like probably not that big of a deal. You just need to continue it on. So at 20% is when mold comes into play. That's when termites come into play. And like wood rot and things along those lines.
Did you say, what did you say? Humidity should be for the winter?
You typically should be under 15%. So under 15, yep. If you're over 15, you can start investigating it a little bit, but 20 in real estate, 20 is the line, right? So you can't come back to a seller and say, well, moisture is at 16%. You guys need to fix the moisture issue. They're not going to do it, right? So that's all around education with the buyer to say like, hey, this may be a little bit on the higher side. We may want to get a crawl space guy to just take a look at it for peace of mind. Like we've got a good crawl space company that will do free inspections and kind of show you what's there. And you guys should have people like that in your back pocket anyway. But 20% is the line on moisture issues. Really experienced listing agents, if you come to them with anything less than 20%, like they're just going to kick it off to the side, right? What? Okay. So how to read the report again? What really needs does anybody have any questions on like helping determine what's big, what's small? Do you guys have, like that was a really good specific example, or how to handle molds, things along those lines.
Yeah,
Yep.
so my listing has a structural engineer file,
Mhm.
and there is like some shifting, but it's like you said it was like just regular settlement of the house, but there used to be like a
Helical pier.
yes,
Mhm.
right, yes, that needs to be like I guess lifted up for there not to be like more cracks on like the sides of the house.
Mhm. Yep.
So my seller is going to make repairs on it. Is that something that's like huge?
That's probably going to cost you a couple grand to do. I am not a broker in
I was
charge,
just curious, yeah.
I would be willing to bet that's a material fact you need to
Yeah,
disclose
no,
that.
I disclosed that,
Perfect.
which, but I guess my question is, will your home inspection, like, find that? It's like
It won't tell, like, we won't make structural determination. So we'll find the cracking, but we won't be able to tell you like what's going on. So when we make like every company does things differently and every person does things differently. What I teach my guys is anything larger than a 1/4 inch goes to a structural engineer. Anything horizontal goes to a structural engineer, especially basements, because that means there's been active pressure on it. And then anything that's moving, shifting, or reopen. So like commonly, like a basement wall or a crawl space wall that the blocks are starting to do this would tell you that things are rotating, they're twisting, they're not moving the right way. Would be a sign for that. If somebody has gotten repairs done and those repairs are starting to re-crack, would also be a structural engineer, because that tells me that either one, the repair was done poorly, or the house is continuing to move and that didn't settle the issue, right? Everything else to me is just kind of like yeah, it's cracking, monitor it, let your clients know like, hey, this is not a structural engineer problem. We might be able to get it repointed so that you can kind of understand what's here. But as you move in, keep your inspection report as a reference, take a picture of it, measure it. And when you check on it a year from now, as long as nothing's changed, then like you're probably good, right? And this is part of like, you can't fix everything as you move into the house, right? Like they need to know what the issue is there. They need to know, because again, if they get a structural engineer report and the engineer says like, there's no problem here, you're not going to get it negotiated. That doesn't mean that it's not going to move in a year, right? Does that help answer your question? Anybody else have any big issues?
Do you see, people that flip houses and stuff, where they'll go around the foundation, I don't know if it's concrete or whatever, but they put something around it to kind of disguise the brick. Do you think people typically do that because they're covering up something? Because
I try to think that people have the right intentions. I know that's not always the case.
but, I mean,
I think there's a lot of people that, especially flippers, I think there's a lot of people that do things cosmetically,
yeah.
not understanding what the real issue is.
They understand.
So I don't think it's an intent, like oftentimes I don't think it's an intentional cover up. I think they don't know what they're doing.
There
Right?
are some flippers that just like paint everything.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah.
And you know, the hard part of this, I mean, I talked to a friend of mine that was trying to do some flipping, you know, this past year. It's really hard to make a profit at it right now. Right? So that's where you have to be hyper aware of these people that are getting into flipping for the first time, thinking that they could do it, and then getting to the end of it and realizing like to do this right and do it well, like you're probably going to be upside down in this market.
That's when you see the listings where you can see that part of the kitchen's been redone, and then there's like flooring missing and walls torn out.
Yep.
What's going on?
Yep.
Ran out of funds.
Ran out of funds. Yep. Or get into it and realize like, oh, this is way harder than I thought it was going to be. Right. Some of that I've also seen too, of like flippers hiring contractors and telling them like, hey, this is the budget, go and make everything look nice. Right. And I've seen that happen over and over and over again. And I've seen, we ended up in a insurance claim with a client this past year over a roof that should have cost $30,000 to install. And the flipper was able to find a gutter company to install the roof for $7,000. And we pointed out issues on the roof. Like we weren't at fault in this. The guy was just young and he was going to try to find money from somebody. And we were just in line for that. And which is why like, you should also make sure you're working with people that have air and emission insurance, because ours would cover referring agents. But, you know, the gutter guy came back and was like, well, we didn't even break even on this job. We're not going to come out and fix it. I'm like, okay, well, that's your problem. That's not my problem. But so we do see stuff like that all the time where you get somebody underqualified that gets in over their head thinking like, well, I deal with metal and I've done a roof on a church trip 10 years ago, right? Like we can figure this out. Probably one of the other things that I've seen a lot of is not taking things to the next step to get things evaluated when they need to be evaluated. So what really needs further evaluation? We've talked about HVAC, right? Really, for the most part, we can tell you whether the system's working or whether it's not working. Beyond that, you start getting into gauges and licensing and all that stuff that an HVAC person is going to have to come out and tell you about. So always get it evaluated. There's things like rusting in HVAC cabinets, which is going to happen over time, like condensation builds up and it's going to cause some rusting. Usually that's not a big concern unless there's like standing water there. So like, probe your inspector, ask questions to say like, hey, is this evidence of a past issue or do you think this is a current issue we need to get further looked at? Really where rusting is a giant concern is if water is continually getting there or if rusting's on the burners. Like if you have rusting on furnace burners, that's when you start getting like carbon monoxide, heat exchanger issues, stuff like that. So again, lots of HVAC in report, cosmetic indication of a past issue. Structural, anything support related. So when you start getting into things in a crawl space that you see like atypical supports, uncommon supports, temporary supports is all something to get looked at. If you start seeing a bunch of, cracking with the floor joists or walls, anything dealing with the center girder, things not bearing properly, anything along those lines would always get that looked at. The beauty of it, HVAC guys will charge you to come back out and do it. Most foundation companies won't. So you can work with, we work with Crawl Space Medic a lot, and like they will come out and do a crawl space inspection for free to tell you what's there and how to do it. And oftentimes they'll do it using our report to kind of just make sure that they're seeing the same things that we are. Plumbing, anytime you have drainage issues, and I'm not talking about like the primary bedroom sink was slow to drain. But if you start seeing consistent drainage issues, usually means that there's a problem either further down the line or in the venting, which can often come in flip houses or, plumbing systems need air from vents to help flush everything through. So if you don't have enough vents, then you start getting like gurgling and backing up, and you flush the toilet and the sink starts gurgling and things like that. We've seen it all. I've seen a couple houses that had zero plumbing vents. And it was amazing that water could even flow down the pipes, but we killed that deal. Anytime you see, especially with plumbing, multiple smaller issues, all tied to the same system. So plumbing and electrical are the two that I would say, like, if you have a bunch of smaller issues together, that's something to get evaluated on the entire system. A good case in point, this was during the COVID craze, so people were just using us as a checkbox and moving on. This person had nine or 10 plumbing issues in the house, and they all had to do with drainage and leakage. They moved into the house. There's one plumbing company that I'm not going to name that we don't get along with very well because they come behind us and tell the buyer that everything is illegal. You cannot get arrested for improper plumbing, by the way, which usually sets people back when they're like, my plumber said this was illegal. So, man, it's like the cops aren't going to come knocking. Let's calm down a little bit. But quoted her $5,000 to replumb her house because it wasn't up to code and that there were other venting issues and there were other things going on. And our response was like, we put 10 plumbing issues here. Why did you not get that evaluated? And the answer was, oh, well, I was told by my realtor, those are small issues and I didn't need to worry about them, right? When you start seeing signs and consistencies, even if they're small over one system, should trigger your brain to say like, hey, I know these things seem small. Let's get it evaluated. It's gonna cost $100, $200 to get a plumber out here to just take a look. And if nothing else, we get peace of mind that your system's okay, and these are small plumbing issues that we can just resolve as you move in, right? But we've seen a bunch of small issues lead to a really big fix because they're consistent over the house. All right, any questions on evaluation and all that? I would totally recommend that if you get a structural engineer recommendation, that you follow through with that. I've seen big issues from it, and I've seen really small issues that seem like really big issues. Like we did a house a couple months ago back in the summer that 7 years old and had really big cracking on the outside all the way through the basement, and a lot of the framing was done improperly, so it wasn't supporting the way that it should, which is leading to some of that cracking. Thankfully, the builder also has 10-year structural warranty, so the builder had to fix a lot of that stuff, but the engineer came out and said, okay, but if you put a couple studs here, a couple studs here, tie this to the floor, and seal up the crack, everything's good. And I think it cost them like $5,000 on what the buyer was ready to walk away in the middle of our inspection, right? She was also a little crazy, but you're gonna have crazy clients. So again, with how to read reports, so the point of that is like structural engineer sounds scary, but until you get it evaluated, you don't know, right? So when your buyer's like, I don't want a structural problem. Okay, I understand. Let's see what he has to say first before we start making other decisions. Let's see what he has to say, because I've also seen people get upwards of $50,000 to $100,000 in concessions or repairs done on houses that needed it because they didn't want to go back on the market and have to disclose it, right? That particular one was also for sale by owner, so that's another story you can tell them of why you should use a real estate agent. Because it was a very experienced real estate agent who worked that seller over and got what she wanted for her client. All right, so as you are getting into this, because you're not going to remember everything we talk about, and there's going to be 100,000 more things that are going to pop up as you guys are operating in your business. So what resources should you have ready at all times? You should be able to call your inspector and feel good about asking dumb questions. Realtors do not leverage us enough in their transactions. I have seen deals come this close to falling apart over literally a $5 issue, until that agent called me and said, hey, we are 2 hours away from the end of due diligence. My buyer is ready to walk because of this issue you guys put in the report. How big of a deal is this? And I said, it's a $5 part at Lowe's. And she was like $5, like I still need to pay somebody to install it, or is this easy? I said, no, it's super easy to install. Like YouTube, if the guy's even remotely handy, can figure this out. Oh, cool, not that big of a deal. They just argued for 2 weeks over this issue, right? Don't be scared when you're getting pushback on stuff to like gain that information and have some more knowledge. If your inspector's not willing to make that phone call or is too busy or in a crawl space, like I'm also happy to be a resource for you guys, even if you never use us. So if you have something you're running into that you want to talk through, use your inspector first. If they're not responding or you want an unbiased opinion, you're welcome, always welcome to call us. Off the record advice, so we talked about before, we're going to say things to you directly as a real estate partner that we're not going to in front of a client, right? Because we know we can be blunt with you guys where you can't always be blunt with a customer. Some of that's like pulling you guys aside and being like, hey, like we probably should kill this deal, right? How do you want us to handle it? How do you want us to go through with it? A lot of inspectors, by the way, have access to get ballpark quotes. So whether that's through AI or there's a bunch of platforms out there that try to sell us all the time on providing quotes to our clients. We do provide a third-party service. We send them separately down that line. They pay them directly. We don't get anything from it. To give you guys ideas, like what you talked about, right? Like, it's not perfect, but it's going to give you an idea of, hey, this really small issue might actually cost $2,500. Maybe we should negotiate this, right? Or hey, this really large issue that you're panicking about is only $350. So we can try to negotiate this, but if they don't, no big deal, right? It's no big deal if they have at least $350 in their budget, right? We also have a lot of dependable contacts that you guys may not have. So if you're struggling to get a hold of your typical contractor, lean on your inspector. They should be able to have a bunch of contacts that they can refer out to you. You guys all know this, and all this can also turn into referrals for you guys if you do it right. You should all have general contractors and tradespeople in your back pocket that you can call at any point to help answer the call. Someone who can tell you just, hey, can I send you this inspection report? And you just tell me what the inspector's seeing and how big of an issue this is. Is this something you guys need to come take a look at to understand better? Or can you just tell me, like, is this big deal, no big deal, right? We'll get into more about how to work with contractors to make sure that you're able to build that kind of relationship and how to approach them. Because I don't know if you guys have heard this, but most tradespeople and contractors don't like working with real estate agents. I think y'all are a whole bunch of flakes. I'm not saying you are. They're saying you are. But we'll talk about how to navigate that, because it's really just a misunderstanding of how a real estate transaction works. So as you navigate this with your client, understanding what's important to them, which you guys should already have a good understanding of, right? But as they go through the inspection report, they should be highlighting things to say, like, hey, this is what we're really concerned about. Cool. Let me take these 10 things and you tell me what are the top 3 that if we can't get negotiated is a deal breaker for you, right? Because that's going to allow you to press on levers to get things right for your client, right? What's on their list that you know you can't negotiate or is going to be tossed right back to the seller? So we talked about an aging roof that doesn't have any issues. You might have leverage to get a new roof. You probably don't. So you know that's going to get kicked back and say, like, hey, I understand this is a big deal. Why don't we do X, Y, and Z and try to move forward? Like, my neighbor owns Mid-Atlantic Roofing, and they're offering payment at closing for new roofs, right? You guys should write that down. But and if you forget, just let me know. But the thing that you can always go back to that and say, like, hey, the roof is the big issue for me, and I know you can't negotiate that. Awesome. Hey, we're going to come back and we're just going to ask for $5,000 in closing credits instead of asking for repairs, right? Hey, we think that there's a decent amount of stuff here. We want to do this. Now you have closing credits, roof gets paid at closing, and you can work out the dollars and cents from there, right? Like, your client may not want to pay $20,000 for a new roof, but they might be willing to pay 15 or 12 or 10 or whatever. And a lot of companies are offering financing with that as well, which finance it after closing. Don't do it before closing. But does that make sense? We talked about batching small issues. So if there's a bunch of ticky-tack issues they want to get fixed, wrap it into one thing. Don't send the seller a list of 12 things to fix, right? These aren't important for the house. Like, to me, the seller shouldn't be fixing something unless it's going to prevent you from closing, right? The seller has what incentive to make things right with the right people, right? Very, very little. Most people are good. Most people are going to do the right thing. And then together you can come up with a priority list or a cash amount that makes sense for your clients. Ahead of this, prep them for what an acceptable outcome looks like. Have you ever heard that no one walks away happy in the right deal? Right? Like, I'll tell a story about myself. Like my mom's a real estate agent. So she was selling our house and I know too much. And she came back with like, hey, the seller or the buyer is asking for these things. And I'm like, no, no, no. Okay, no, no, no. And I was like, this is $1,500 worth of stuff. And I was like, $1,500. And she goes, well, they came back at 5,000. I'm like, no. She goes, I'm going to tell them 3 and you need to sit down and be quiet. My mom can say that to me. She's my mom, right? And I'll listen when somebody like pushes at me that way. But, you know, she came back and she was like, $1,500 extra is not going to prevent you from what your end goal looks like, right? You have to be able to have that conversation ahead of time to say like, what does that acceptable outcome look like to you? And then if they're way off on expectations, then you can say, hey, I understand this is what you want. This is not realistic, and I need to start preparing you for this, right? And if you're able, you know, when I say sell low and aim high kind of thing, like under promise, over deliver, that's a better way to put it. Math and logic. I know real estate exams are just math, right? Remind them what good deals often end up in the middle. There's a lot of people that I've dealt with that don't understand basic logic and basic math on, you've just spent $1,500 on contractors and inspectors and due diligence money and all this stuff. Like you have, if it's not the right house, it's not the right house. But you're going to spend this again to get into another house that may not be as good, right? So are you willing to do that? Is that what you want to do? Because if you are, I'll support you. But if you're not, if you're doing this over negotiating $500, it's going to cost you 5 to 10 times that to get into another house, right? People aren't logical. They're emotional, right? Sometimes you have to cut through that to get there. I've also seen this common mistake too. As you're writing your due diligence request, don't try to fit everything on the DDR form. Use addendums and attachments as you need to. I will tell you that like when we do re-inspections and we've seen some of these due diligence forms, I'm like, I don't know how anybody knows what they're negotiating here. Don't write or translate anything. This is also another mistake that I see, is that they'll try to translate, an agent will try to translate what's in the inspection report onto the due diligence request form without fully understanding the issue, or they're told by their contractor, hey, sister, this would, and they say something different or they don't fully explain it and the repair is done wrong and they're stuck eating that repair because inspector comes back with a re-inspection and says, hey, you can't, like, this is not the right fix, but it's exactly the way it was written in the due diligence request because you translated it. Who's paying to get that fix? It's not the seller, right? I've seen contractors literally go line by line and just go, well, this is exactly what you told us to do, right? Be specific on the type of contractor. We can get into, if you guys have questions about like when a licensed person's needed versus not. Oftentimes with home inspectors, it's a CYA move to say, get a licensed electrician to fix that loose outlet, get a licensed plumber to fix the loose faucet handle. That's not always the case. We can get into details. It's a whole separate discussion on what needs a license and what doesn't. But if you are concerned that the seller's not going to do the right thing, that license, just like you, just like me, like holds us accountable, right? There's a board that's holding us accountable on doing the right thing. And then follow up with the listing agent once they've gotten that request to make sure they understand everything, to ask any questions they have. A lot of times, like we've been told to call listing agents to go through questions that they have about the inspection report. As long as you trust your inspector to handle that in a black and white, not inserting themselves into negotiations, we just provide information at that point. Again, easy to be contentious in this process. Don't let your emotions win the day. How are you guys feeling? You guys overwhelmed? You good? No, so good. Awesome. Great. How many of you guys do re-inspections when the seller does repairs?
Depends, I had a structural reinspection after structural.
Yeah, makes sense. I'm not swearing. These are just letters. They're really, really annoying for everybody involved, right? Especially on our end, they almost always end up in an argument. It's not fun for us to do. We don't make a lot of money at it, hardly any money, as a matter of fact. And I will also tell you that if the seller is doing repairs, that you need to get one done for your buyer. 50 to 75% of the time, this is over 11, 12 years, that repairs are actually done by the seller. And once you close, that leverage is gone. This is also why, like, negotiating the small stuff isn't necessarily the best move, because it's harder to keep those handymen accountable than it is like a contractor that has a license to it, right? And when I say 50 to 75% of the repairs are actually done, you give them a list of 10, means that 5 to 7 of them are going to be done, and there's usually 2 or 3 extras that haven't been done. That happened to me when I moved in my first house. I wasn't an inspector at that point. I didn't know what I was looking at, and we moved in, and I became an inspector, and I started looking around, being like, I didn't fix that. Pretty sure we negotiated that. Like, it happened on my house, right? It is just the nature of things, and timing gets in the way. Re-inspections will hold everybody accountable.
I never have had a re-inspection. I mean, I will go in and check things, you know, but I'm not like a professional inspector. But
yeah, and I mean, and there's a difference between like feeling comfortable that things have been repaired, right? Like a loose handrail doesn't need my judgment.
Yeah.
Right? You can go in and be like, it's fine, right? Show me that the gas fireplace works. Like, I don't need to do that. Like, just have them take a video. Like, it's fine. But judgment items, inconspicuous areas, crawl space, attic, unfinished basements, things where you're like, I kind of understood what the inspector was saying, but not really, and I need to understand a little bit more. Decking issues, structural issues, things like that make a lot of sense to bring somebody else in for a re-inspection. All right. I'm going to go through this relatively quickly, but we'll give you some tips on how to work with contractors, how to vet contractors, and also how to turn them into a referral source for you. So obviously you need good people. I think that's a given. But everyone that you work with, you need to make sure they have general liability insurance, which is going to protect you in case they damage the house. They need to have workers' compensation insurance. If they are sending employees out there or subcontractors out there, ask for that documentation before you ever bring them out on a job. Because if they hurt themselves when they're at the house, that could be on you for hiring them. It could also be on the seller for not having safe access. If a license is needed, make sure that you understand that they are licensed. There are databases everywhere that will show you any kind of disciplinary records that they have on them. Just because somebody has gotten dinged by the state doesn't mean that they are bad at what they do. Might mean asking some questions, right? We had a house that we did a re-inspection. I was picking up a radon test, and I walked into a cloud of smoke, and it was clearly electrical. And thankfully, the breakers worked the way they should. The panel had caught fire, and the main power got shut off because of the surge that was there. So I called the agent, who brought her own people in to get the work done. And I just said, hey, I just walked into the situation. She's like, oh, that's not good. And I said, well, who did you use for this? And she goes, oh, I used John Smith. I don't actually remember the guy's name. And I said, is he a licensed electrician? And she's like, I think so. I was like, think so or no so? She goes, well, he might not be an electrician, but he might be a general contractor. I said, okay, hold on a second. I pulled up the general contractor database on North Carolina. His name was not in there. They even have licenses who've been expired. They have databases on there. I said, hey, this person's never been a licensed general contractor, never been a licensed electrician. You hired a handyman to do panel work and about caught the house on fire. $3,500 later, they had to get the panel replaced. And you guys can imagine who's paying for that, right? Your buyers are going to trust you. Your sellers are going to trust you. You have to vet people to make sure that you're bringing the right people in, right? Not having a license doesn't mean they're not good.
So, I was going through something similar to this last week. What is a qualifier license for a general contractor? Do you know what that means?
So I know there's 3 different kinds of licensing, and it's all based on the amount of money they have in their bank account. So like it's like, right? It's not saying that you have that money in your bank account, it's saying that you have access to it, but you have like limited contractors licenses and like unlimited licenses. And I think there's multiple steps along the way that basically says like, hey, you can only work on projects up to $250,000. You can work on projects up to $1 million, and you have unlimited. Like, I don't know what the actual numbers are, but I know there's stages on what that is.
You know, this guy had a qualifier license. And I didn't know.
Maybe he was making it up.
What was on? No, it was on the.
It was on a card.
website.
Yeah.
I couldn't figure out. I don't understand.
Yeah, maybe he has the right qualifications and is just waiting for one extra step, or I don't know. I don't know enough about the licensing process. All right, any contractor or tradespeople that you guys bring into your business need to be trained by you on how a real estate transaction works. Most don't understand a real estate transaction or what's needed during that time, which is why you have to train them. You have to know how to work in a transaction and what you need, right? So we had an issue with a client pop up, and I think like this will just help show you an example of how to work with contractors. This guy, I saw money signs. It was $1 million house. Our guy made a mistake. We missed a roofing issue on a secondary building. Long story that we don't need to get into. That guy's no longer working with us. And the roofer came back that the agent hired and said $25,000, fix it. And my first reaction was, holy crap, like this is not good. One of our top agents, like we're gonna have to figure something out here. So we started asking the contractor questions, and we're like, hey, this is your house, and you were to patch this up to give an extra 5 to 7 years of life, what would you do? And he goes, oh, I just do this, and this. Cool, how much does that cost? $2,500. So we took a $25,000 roofing issue to $2,500 that the client was happy with. We ended up, like the client was actually very reasonable after that. I split the cost with them because our guy did make a mistake, and we moved forward. Agent's happy, client's happy. I'm out $1,250, but that's okay. So the point of that is like contractors oftentimes, especially on bigger houses, do get money signs in their eyes. And if you're not asking follow-up questions and you're not pressing the quote a little bit, oftentimes that's how deals get killed, right? So you have to train your contractors ahead of time to say like, hey, I know that the right option that you tell homeowners may be the best option. But I also know what I need in a transaction is not always the best option. Sometimes I need room, and I'm going to need different options that we can bring back to my clients and bring to the sellers, because if we had made a mistake and say that was something that came up during the inspection, that seller wasn't going to pay $25,000 to get a new roof done, right? But they would have easily paid $2,500, right? It's also going to show your client like, hey, we're here to work a solution, and that solution may not be perfect, right? Let's talk about the expectation setting. Also making sure that you're giving them the right kind of leads, because we're in the South, people have a hard time saying no. Like, people want to be nice about it. But if you're sending your contractor bad leads, they're not going to work with you. And they also will probably no-show you at some point. right? So have those conversations ahead of time to say, hey, these are the kind of buyers that I work with. What do these leads need to look like for you to give me a thumbs up? And then a lot of times we talk about contractors don't like realtors, and it's because of no communication or they feel like they're being used in the quoting process, right? If a contractor is going to work with you and do things and bend over backwards for you, which is what you want, you need to be able to actually send them some business, right? And make sure they're getting return out of that relationship. So if you're using people for quotes and then you're negotiating with the seller and the seller's using somebody else, like that contractor over time, unless you have that conversation ahead of time, say like, hey, look, I'm going to bring you 10 leads and there may only be like 4 that use you, but I'm going to recommend you every single time that I get. But in certain transactions, I'm going to need a quote from you that I know the likelihood of you getting the job is low. And I need to know that you're okay with that or how you want me to handle that, right? Any questions on that?
On inspections,
Mhm.
do you recommend, contractors?
We have a like preferred vendor list that we can send out. So yeah, people that we know, like, and trust. And we give a couple different options and they don't pay for it or anything like that. It's just the kindness of my heart. Give them leads. Yep. People that I know will do good work. With contractors, we talk about ones, they need to give you options, that you need to give room to negotiate, which we'll talk about. The right fix, most expensive is usually the right fix. And it's the ideal fix for the client, right? But it may not work. So you have the right fix, you have the life extension fix, like what we just talked about with that roofing issue, and then a Band-Aid, right? Like you may have a client that's like, hey, just give me 6 months and I can replace the HVAC, but like, just get me 6 months, right? Okay, so you have a coil leaking with the evaporator coil. Fixing that, it doesn't make sense to do it. We're just going to replace the unit in time. So you may need to try to negotiate a couple of recharges of Freon to just keep the system working until your client gets their feet on the ground and is able to do it.
I would recommend it on warranty.
Me too.
Yeah. But
I use one of those to bridge the gap with my HVAC too.
Yeah. But a lot of times you have to be careful with home warranties because if the issue is written in the inspection report, they won't cover it, right? So oftentimes with warranties, they're going to do the HVAC evaluation and get you up front with that.
If I know it's an old system, I mean, if I know from the first day,
Yeah,
then I'm gonna recommend
for sure.
for my seller to get it.
Yeah, because I didn't have any issues at inspection, but it developed issues very
Yes.
quickly.
Yep.
As soon as the season changed.
Mine did too. Mine did too, because they hot wired the air conditioning to the motor. And so they bypassed the heat entirely. So every time the season switched and we flipped it over, like nothing worked. And they kept coming back out and re-hot wiring it. And I was like, no, like, can we just like make the right fix here? But I will say, like with home warranties, I'll plug Ashley Williams, if you guys don't, if you know who she is, but she will not hesitate to call me to help talk through an issue to make sure that your clients are covered. So like, if you use somebody else for home warranties, like that's good questions to ask. And like, what resources do they have to make sure that they can help push things through, right? Because she'll call me and say like, hey, looks like this might have been on your inspection report. How do I word this so the client gets covered? Right? And she can help push things through. So we just talked about this. Every old HVAC system, every single HVAC contractor is going to tell you to replace it. All right. I've never seen a roofer that doesn't want to replace a roof. Right. And most of it is because they're using subcontracted crews. They are a sales organization. They are not a roofing company. Right. So they don't do minor repairs. They don't do patchwork. If it's not a full replacement, it's not worth their time. So we talked about basically how do you land in that middle zone, right? So that big HVAC issue, 12,000 to replace it. The issue to fix it may be 1,500. You go back to the seller and go, hey, look, we went above asking price on this house, whatever the conditions are. We haven't asked for anything. We know that you've already said no to the 12,000. We know that there's a fix here, but we also know that that fix is temporary and that we want to kind of bridge the gap. Like, are you guys okay with 5,000 or 6,000 to help bridge that gap, right? Now, not only have you paid for the repair, you've helped pay for part of the new unit. And then remember to tell your buyer most companies offer financing after closing. All right, that's to get me to stop talking. So just kind of recapping everything, again, you cannot over communicate with anybody in this process. Cannot do it. My wife has been working with us for about a year, and she doesn't like annoying people. She doesn't like annoying people, and she also doesn't like annoying people. That makes sense. But she does not want to bother others, right? And makes assumptions. And I try to push her through, and I'm like, hey, you feel like you're bothering somebody? If they tell you you're communicating too much, that you're giving too much information, or that like, hey, I've got it, leave us alone. You've done your job. That's okay, right? I don't want the call that, hey, we didn't communicate enough to get through the issue. Build scripts, build your process, be open with your buyers on it. Don't hold it close to the vest. Don't assume anybody knows. There's so many things that I have to remind my guys of that, like, you know, you've been doing this for 6 years. If you and one of my guys are talking about an inspection issue, you handle it fine because you've dealt with it. My guy's handling it because he sees it every day, and your buyer's over here going like, what? Right? So be open with the process, build the scripts around it so that you can understand how to navigate it. And again, I really want to encourage you guys to be leaders for your clients, not just a speaker for your client, right? Don't necessarily amplify, use emotions to help you as needed, but your job is to help guide your client through the process. And then build relationships, right? All right, you guys have had stuff. I'll leave my contact information up here. What questions do you guys have?